I never believed in supernatural stories. Ghosts, demons, haunted places, just myths created to scare people. But what happened to me in the middle of the desert changed everything. I wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. It started as a solo road trip. I had been driving for hours, the sun beating down on the endless stretch of sand and rock. My GPS had died an hour ago, and there was no signal. I wasn't worried at first. I had a map, and I knew the general direction of where I was going, but something felt off. The horizon shimmered in the heat. The waves of distortion making it look like water lay just ahead. Mirage, nothing unusual in a desert. But this one was different. It wasn't just water. It was down. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. Downs weren't supposed to be here. I was miles from civilization. I squinted, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. The buildings looked old, sun-bleached, but intact. A few structures seemed like houses. One looked like a saloon straight out of an old western. And in the center was a towering church with a rusted bell. It didn't disappear. Usually, mirages fade when you approach them, but this one stayed. Solid. Real. I don't know what possessed me to get out of the car, but I did. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Something pulling me toward it. The moment my feet hit the scorching sand, the world around me felt heavier. The silence was deafening. No wind, no birds, not even the distant hum of my car engine. Just absolute stillness. I walked closer, my boots crunching against the sand. As I neared the first building, I noticed something strange. No footprints. The sand was untouched, like no one had been here for years. Yet, the town looked preserved. There were signs of life. An old rocking chair swaying gently on a porch. A curtain fluttering in a window. Then I heard it. A faint whisper. I froze, my skin crawling. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind. The voice was distant, like it was carried through a long tunnel. Yet it was right next to me. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone. Nothing. The whisper came again. My name. A cold wave of fear washed over me. No one knew I was here. No one could have known. I should have turned back. I should have run. But something deep inside me, something I still can't explain, made me take another step forward. I hesitated. My instinct screaming at me to leave, but my feet moved forward as if they had a mind of their own. The whisper had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the air feel thick, suffocating. The town stretched before me, untouched yet strangely alive, as if it had been waiting for someone. For me, I stepped onto the wooden porch of the nearest building. A small house with peeling paint and broken shutters. The rocking chair creaked, as if someone had just left it. The door stood slightly ajar. I leaned in, listening. Nothing. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. Dust floated in the dim light streaming through the cracked window. The room was fully furnished. An old table with 2 chairs, a rusted oil lamp, and a faded photograph lying face down. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It was a picture of a family, a man, a woman, and a child. Their faces were blurred, like the image had been smudged. But there was something else. Something that made my breath hitch. A shadowy figure stood behind them, barely visible, its features indistinct. A sharp creak came from the hallway. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned, expecting to see someone. The house was empty. I backed away, nearly knocking over a chair. The silence pressed in again, heavy and unnatural. My chest tightened. I needed to get out. Now, as I stepped back onto the porch, the air around me shifted. The town no longer looked abandoned. The saloon doors swung open, as if someone had just walked through. A lantern flickered to life in one of the upper windows of the church. Footsteps echoed from somewhere nearby. I turned toward my car, ready to run, but it was gone. The breath caught in my throat. I had parked it right there. I was sure of it. But now, all I saw was endless sand stretching in every direction. My footprints were gone, erased as if I had never been here. The whisper returned, louder this time. My name, drawn out in a slow, rasping breath. I spun around, my heart pounding against my ribs. Shadows moved in the windows, figures shifting just beyond my line of sight, shapes that hadn't been there before. Then I saw him. A man stood in the middle of the street, facing me. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He lifted his hand, pointing at me. And then he vanished. The whispers turned into voices, murmurs rising all around me, overlapping, pressing against my skull. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside my head. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, merging into something almost rhythmic, like a chant spoken in a language I couldn't understand. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I backed away from the street, my eyes darting between the shifting shadows in the windows. The town was alive, but not in any way that made sense. Then the bell in the church tower rang, a deep resonating clang that sent a shiver down my spine. It echoed through the empty streets, and with each ring, the air around me seemed to pulse. The sun, which had been high in the sky just moments ago, was now lower, cast in long, unnatural shadows that stretched toward me. Time was slipping away, bending, distorting. I turned, desperate to find a way out, and that's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the buildings, stepping onto the street in complete silence. They moved unnaturally, too smooth, too synchronized. Their faces were wrong, blurred like the photograph I had found. Empty sockets where their eyes should have been. Their mouths hung slightly open, as if they were mid-scream, yet no sound came from them. I took a step back, and in unison, they stepped forward. The man with the hat was among them again, standing directly in front of the church. He didn't move like the others. He was real, solid. His face was still obscured, but I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and suffocating. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The town, the figures, the unnatural twilight pressing in around me. I felt like I had stepped out of reality and into something else. Then he finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was deep, hollow, like it came from beneath the ground. It sent a wave of nausea through me, my stomach twisting painfully. The figures around him twitched at the sound of his voice, their heads jerking slightly, as if they had been waiting for it. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place?" He tilted his head slowly. "A mistake." The ground beneath me trembled. The sand rippled like water, and suddenly, I wasn't standing in the middle of a town anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere worse. The sky above me had turned black, swirling with something thick and unnatural, like smoke trapped under glass. The buildings, the church, everything was decaying before my eyes, rotting as if centuries were passing in mere seconds. The figures weren't figures anymore. They were bones, half buried in the shifting sand. their hollow eyes locked onto me even in death. And then I saw it. A massive pit in the center of the town, deep and endless, swallowing everything around it. The whispers came from there, rising in a chorus of voices that weren't human. The man with the hat stood at the edge of it, staring down. "You have to leave," he said again. But this time, there was something different in his tone. Urgency, almost. Pity. I tried to move, but the ground beneath me lurched, pulling me toward the pit. The sand wrapped around my ankles like hands, dragging me down. My screams were lost in the howling wind that had come from nowhere. And for a terrifying moment, I saw what was inside that pit. Not darkness, not emptiness, eyes, hundreds, thousands, watching, waiting. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. I was lying in the sand. My car was right in front of me, exactly where I had left it. The town was gone. No ruins, no footprints. Nothing but the endless desert stretching in every direction. But the sun was setting now, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I had lost more time than I could understand. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break my ribs. My car was right there, exactly where I had parked it. No sign of the town, no footprints, no shifting figures lurking in the windows. Just endless sand stretching beneath the eerie glow of the setting sun. But something was wrong. The air still felt heavy, thick with the echo of whispers that had vanished too suddenly. My hands were trembling as I fumbled for my keys, yanking open the car door and throwing myself inside. I slammed it shut, locking it instinctively, as if that would somehow keep me safe. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. In the rearview mirror, I saw him, the man with the hat. He stood exactly where I had just been, his face still shrouded in darkness. He didn't move. He didn't step forward. But I knew he was watching. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, my breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. I had to get out of here. Now, slamming my foot on the gas, I tore down the road, sand kicking up behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The desert stretched endlessly before me, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. The sun was still setting. I had no idea how long I had been out there. My phone was dead. My watch had stopped ticking. Time had bent and twisted in that place, and I had no way of knowing how much of it I had lost. After what felt like hours, I finally saw a gas station on the horizon. The neon sign flickered weakly, a beacon of reality in the nightmare I had just escaped. I pulled into the lot, my hands shaking as I threw the car into park and stumbled out. The attendant inside looked up as I entered, his expression shifting from boredom to concern. "You all right, man?" he asked. I must have looked as bad as I felt, covered in sweat, eyes wild with panic. I don't know, I admitted. I think I got lost." The attendant frowned. "Where were you coming from?" I hesitated. How could I even explain? "Somewhere out in the desert," I muttered. His face changed instantly. "You didn't stop, did you?" His voice was low, almost fearful. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He leaned in slightly. "People see things out there. Towns, houses, people that ain't real. If you stop, they notice you." I felt the world tilt slightly. My skin was ice cold despite the desert heat. "Who notices you?" I whispered. The attendant shook his head. "You got lucky." I wanted to tell him I didn't feel lucky, that something still felt wrong. but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I nodded, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and paid. My hands still shook as I took my change. As I walked back to my car, I hesitated. For the first time, I glanced at the back seat. Empty. I exhaled shakily, gripping the steering wheel. Just drive. Just get away from here. I pulled back onto the road, trying to push the memories of that cursed town out of my head. But as I drove, I caught something in the rearview mirror. Dust rising in the distance. And for the briefest moment, just before the gas station disappeared from sight, I swore I saw something shimmer in the horizon. A town. Waiting. And somehow, I knew it wouldn't be the last time it found me.